Hector, this is such a treat to get to talk to you. I am so excited about this. You grew up in New York,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
In New York City?
Uh-huh. I was born in Brooklyn, grew up in Queens, went to school there, and then spent summers in Rhode Island on this farm that my mom owned.
So is that where you got into farming?
That's where I got it. Yeah, that's where the bug started. And I went in the Army and I got all this, ideas of saving the world kind of complex. So I got into social work and all this other stuff. But then I got back into it when I was in Georgia and back here.
And everybody here knows you for blueberries,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And was that something that you learned there or something that you just developed here?
No, actually, I went to the experiment station in Plateau, Tennessee, and saw the blueberries there. And I thought that would be a perfect, they were relatively easy crop and healthy and good for you. No big bugs or pests or disease problems, and just have to have water and sun and decent soil.
And you've got all that right here?
Oh gosh, in abundance. I've never been in a place where the soil was so wonderful as it is along the creek here. Of course, we have floods and all that,
Yeah.
but it's a beautiful. I can't imagine how I ever was so fortunate as to land in a place like this. It'd be a state park anywhere else, 4 waterfalls up the hollow.
Yeah.
Just peaceful and quiet. Oh man.
How did you get here?
Well, we had a farm in Georgia and about 45 minutes out of Atlanta. And the city bought 600 acres half a mile away to build an airport. And we didn't want to spend our old age under the jet lanes, so we decided to look. And we didn't think this would be a very good spot to put an airport. They thought you'd be safe here.
Yeah. Well, it's been a haven for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You've been very welcoming. You and Susie, your wife, you've been very welcoming.
Well, we had so little to do with it. I mean, the beauty of the place is nothing that we did. And so it's wonderful to be able to share that kind of God-given beauty, this particular area with other people. That's meant a lot to us.
You call it Hidden Springs Farm?
It was our name in Georgia because I used to walk around our farm there, and Susie couldn't get around very much to see the different place, and I tell her about a spring I'd found here and another spring some other place, and so she came up with that name for the farm there in Georgia, and it worked. Perfect fit for here too.
How did you meet Susie? You guys are wonderful life partners, and you really, it's a blessing to see you together.
Well, it's kind of a long story. I was a member of a religious community, a Christian community up in New York State, and she was a Hutterite living communally. And their Hutterite group wanted to reach modern people. And this group that I was a part of had been pretty effective in reaching the modern world. And so we had an exchange of young people. And that's how I met Susie. Here I am, college educated, and Susie living on a farm her whole life, could clean a chicken like nothing. And here I was with all this, what you call it, intellectual background, I suppose, and it was wonderful. I think it's to December 1st. It's 54 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's phenomenal. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow. So you went to Harvard?
Yeah.
And graduated from Harvard?
Uh-huh.
And what was your major at heart?
Sociology, social anthropology. I was studying how different societies solve their problems. You know, crime, old age, poverty, you know, all the different things, illness. So I got really interested in communal life. And when I got out of school, I lived kind of communally in a work camp in Belgium and working with the Quakers. Then I went to Israel, lived on the kibbutz for a couple of months, and came back to the U.S. and started looking at different communal groups.
So you've always sort of been on this path of peace, right?
Well, actually, that came after the war. I was in World War II for 2.5 years, and I saw enough that I never, ever wanted to be a part of that again. And so I became actively promoting peace and reconciliation between different people with big differences, and small differences too.
Was there something, Hector, in your childhood that sort of you think laid the foundation for that, or?
Well, my mom, I don't think she'd have called herself nonviolent or a pacifist or anything, but she was very socially conscious. She voted for Norman Thomas as long as he ran for president, and she was she was just so excited when Eleanor Roosevelt resigned from the DAR, from when they refused to let Marian Anderson sing at their building in Washington, D.C. And, she and her brother, my uncle, were like, opposite poles, because, so my uncle was anti-union, anti-everything. He had his factory and he didn't want the unions in there. And my mom was just realizing that unions were, especially in those days, giving working people a decent chance. And so it was...
I bet those were interesting family dinners, weren't they?
They were. Kind of explosive sometimes. It really was.
Your uncle was wealthy and pursued that path?
Yeah, he pursued that 100%, I think. He tried to help. He did do a lot of good things. But it was central to his life. His business was. Yeah. It was his whole life, actually. He loved music and stuff like that. I used to play the piano, and I'd play him to sleep when I went to visit him. And it's the piano that's upstairs there.
I wondered about that. I saw Chopin and all the great music. Do you still play?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I still do, but I'm not very regular about it. My eyesight's not too good. My hearing's not too good.
Were you classically trained? Did you
Well,
study?
I had a music teacher down the street, and I went to Juilliard in New York City for one summer while I was in college, just to rule out music or decide whether I was really good enough And I was very grateful. The music teachers told me, it's wonderful, you play very well, but to be a professional, you've got to have the discipline. And I was afraid I wouldn't really love music if I practiced 6 hours a day, every day. It wouldn't be quite the same.
Right. It'd be a job.
Yeah, yeah.
When you were living, after World War II, and you were living communally, trying some different things, what were you looking for?
Well, I was really looking for a way of life that would be just and where people cared about each other. I was very impressed by the kibbutz because in the early days, it was a very vibrant, youthful culture. I was a vegetarian in those days, and they had a vegetarian table at every kibbutz. And I remember dancing. The circle dances was just delightful. We'd cut the barley at Passover. We cut the first of the grain and dance in the moonlight in circle with the moon coming over Mount Hermon. It was just unbelievably, not just beautiful, but the connection with the earth and the cycles of the earth and everything was just wonderful. But it was very military, and that's what turned me off. Just scouts going off. It was right after the War of Independence, and scouts going off would have a man with a loaded rifle at the front and the rear of the column. Just young kids going hiking. We're not free.
Wow.
And I wasn't Jewish, but they invited me to stay. I played Chopin at Passover, and they said that was probably the first time they'd ever heard Chopin
I bet.
Passover. It was fun. It was a great time. And then I came back and started looking at communal life. And, sort of radical Christian groups like the Catholic Worker. I lived there for a while. And Quakers. I always was attracted to people who I guess they call it now, walk the talk. Mm-hmm. Who didn't just talk religion, but who did something. You could see that it affected their life in some way.
Where were you during the racial tensions during the 60s and Martin Luther King?
Yeah, I was in Atlanta. We left the community and went to Atlanta, and because I felt it was the most positive thing happening in the country. So we moved to Atlanta, and Quakers had a tutoring program in this little neighborhood called Vine City, and we decided not to take it as a 9-to-5 job, but to move into the neighborhood. And I guess we were the first white people ever to live in that neighborhood, and we were welcomed so warmly. Just the opposite of what would have happened, especially in those days, if a black family had moved into a white neighborhood. And gosh, that was one of the, I think, the Army and those were two transforming experiences. And then Trisha's murder was probably the third one that when I think of the things that really shook me up. Mm-hmm. We were there for 2.5 years. We eventually left the neighborhood, and we took Trisha with us. She was from that neighborhood.
Now tell us about that. Tell us about Patricia.
Okay, yeah, we were living in this all ghetto neighborhood, and behind us we had a little yard to our house, and behind us there was an apartment building with a mother and two little girls that were about the ages of our children. Their mama went to work every day, so they were often at our house, actually pretty regularly at our house after school. And then their mama would sometimes drink up the rent money and they'd be thrown out on the street, and the kids would stay with us until she found another apartment. And so they got to be really close to our children and to Susie and me. And when it got time for us to leave, they asked if they could come with us. And so their mama said yes when I asked her. And they came with us up to Pennsylvania. We went to this Quaker school up there. And Trish lived with us, and she just blossomed. You know, she was very artistic and did this big mural on the high school wall in Dallas, Georgia, just been integrated. And then she went on to college and graduated with highest honors from Fisk in Nashville. And then she went on to Atlanta University and got her master's in library science. And she was the first one in her family ever to finish college, to have a house of her own.
When she was tragically murdered, what a horrible thing that was for you, for your whole family. What a loss, because she was doing such incredible things.
Yeah. Yeah, she was. She was living in this, it was a changing neighborhood in Atlanta where she'd bought a house, and she worked at the library with children, very much children such as she had been, you know, who had trouble reading and writing and speaking clearly. She was a storyteller, among other things. And she took a child from the neighborhood, adopted her, and got her through college and marriage. She was working late one night, and this guy he was a crack addict. Saw no lights on at her house, so that's what he did. He was stealing for his habit, and that was about all he did, was steal and get crack. At that point, anyway. And so he broke in and took some stuff and got his hit of crack, and then he was walking around the neighborhood again and had his first hit, and he wanted more. He said he's a heavy user. So he broke in again and got a lot of stuff together, and she came home, and he hid in the closet, hoping he would get out the back window, and she opened the closet and fell backwards, and he tied her hands behind her back, and they had a conversation. You know, it just sounded exactly the way, you know, Trish would have behaved. You know, she was a very strong young woman, very courageous. But evidently, Ivan Simpson's the name of the man, and he asked her about the sewing dummies that were in the room, and she said a woman named Susie had taught her to sew, and that was my wife. And then she made bridal gowns as a sideline to her work in the library. He told her to put bars on the back door and always leave a light on. And she told him where there was food and to get a hold of his crack habit. And then he left and got his massive hit of crack, and that's when he came back, and he'd never killed anybody before. But he strangled her. I thought he was a monster, that only a monster could have done what he did. And it was a monstrous crime, there's no doubt about it. But I felt it was important to separate the man, the person, from the crime, and separate the sin from the sinner, I guess is a way you could put it too. And to hate the one, but not the other. Tricia's buried here on our farm. We have a little cemetery. Actually, it was a place where Susie and I had planned to be buried.
How did you get there, Hector? How did you get to that place of forgiveness? Because you said it affected your faith. It affected.
Oh, it sure did. I lost my faith for a while because I just to ask, where was God? How could God allow this to happen? And it was also, when I look back on it, it seems so weird. You know, I felt like I was the only person in the whole doggone world who had suffered in this way. And then, you know, when I kind of came out of it, I realized that there are millions of people who have lost their loved ones too. They've been blown to bits, they've been shot, they've been murdered in various ways in crime. It's just, well, it just made me feel like that revenge and getting even, anger and hate are, I just believe so strongly that they're all destructive forces, and that peace and reconciliation and love, you know, are the strongest forces in the world. And that's what we need to project. That's what we need to allow to come into our lives. I think it's the only, you know, the cycle of violence. People talk about how violence begets violence and everything, and it just goes on and on and on. And I really came to the realization that the only way to stop it was to say it stops here, right here with me. I will not hate. I will not get revenge. I'll not hit back. And here we think about it. I mean, it's what you hear in church, the Sermon on the Mount, is that's what it is. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. You know, forgive 70 times 7. I was just thinking about Susie. It's been a little more than 70 times 7 between us.
Yeah, I bet.
But I think it has to be.
Well, she was 100% supportive of. She was also ready to forgive him, right?
Yes, yes, she was.
How has that changed your lives and Ivan's? How has that changed both of you, all of you?
Well, I think the realization that hate, as somebody told me once, hate is like you take poison and expect the other guy to die. And I've seen how it's destroyed people's lives. Some people, actually, I've been able to see it more closely since all this went on, because I've met people who have had family members murdered who are so filled with hate that they destroy their relationships to their family even through it. It's really, to say destructive is just putting it very mildly.
Was he remorseful? Was Ivan remorseful?
Oh yeah, Yeah, that was a thing too. That I guess in our case, you know, not all criminals are remorseful, and I think in our case, when when he was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole, when he knew he was going to die in prison and his life was, so to speak, over, that he went up to the microphone and with tears streaming down his cheeks apologized twice for the pain he had caused. You know, that night was when I forgave him, because I couldn't get it out of my mind. You know, a person could say, okay, big deal. You killed my daughter and you're sorry, huh? All right. But it wasn't, I just didn't feel that way. I mean, when I thought about that, I felt he had nothing. His life was over. You know, he's going to die in jail, and he apologized, and it was the only thing he had to give me, was that apology, and to the rest of the people who had been hurt. And it really moved me that he had done that. And I wrote him a pretty angry letter early on. I wrote him other letters on and on. We still write. We send him a Christmas package, you know, and then when I see the package on the floor, I think, you out of your mind? You're sending a Christmas package to the man that murdered your daughter. And I just don't know. It is, I suppose, in a lot of ways, it does look crazy writing to him. I don't think anybody else writes to him. And I just feel, well, I guess really I feel that that's what God wants me to do.